let's kind of talk a bit about data and where we're headed. And for the few of you who were here last year, I had an exploding whale. And the marketing team said, no more exploding whales. So I won't do the exploding whale, and I'm not going to blow up an elephant, I promise. But when I said, hey, let's do an elephant that's chained, there was just a long pause. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to do it. And they said, no, you can't do it. And I said, well, do you have data to show me that I can't do it? And they said, no, I don't have data, so I'm doing it. It's back to the hippo, the highest paid person in the room gets to decide. So I'm going to start with a story. This is a story that Lloyd Tabb, our founder, used to say early in Looker, but I think it's really applicable to where we are now in technology. And as the story goes, many of you might know the story of the elephant chain. A man is walking through the circus grounds, and he sees out in the field this group of elephants, really big, majestic, wonderful animals. And they're all just standing there, not trying to get away. They're all just standing there. And he sees, they have these really tiny chains on their legs that they could clearly break. I mean, they're thin. Some of them aren't even attached to anything. They're just laying there. But the elephants are just kind of staying put, and they're not going anywhere. And they're giant, giant animals. So he asks the trainer who's standing there, and he says, why don't these animals try and get away? It just seems like they would just walk away. You'd have these dangerous things roaming the circus. And the trainer said, it's the way they were conditioned when they were young. When they're very young and small, we use these same chains and we tie them to a post, and the elephants tug and they pull and they try and get away. And they tug and they pull and they try and get away. And over those first few months and year of their life, they keep trying until one day they just stop trying. They just stop. And from that point forward, they never try to break away again. And all along as they've grown, they could clearly get away, but they don't break the chains. They've been conditioned to not test them. And I think that's applicable in this world of technology, especially in the space that we're in, this data and analytics, because things have changed underneath and they've shifted and they've evolved, but really the fundamental ideas of how we do data projects hasn't changed drastically. And oftentimes we're kind of chained to the architectures and the legacy of the past. And as we've been talking about, for the past 5 and 6 years, is that's changing. There's a new wave, there's a new evolution of technology that may now start to release those chains. But the chains are real, right? I mean, we have been conditioned around how this technology has evolved. And if you heard, kind of what Jen was saying, or if you've heard at any of our other kind of meetups and things like that, we talk about the waves of BI and analytic technology. And I just wanted to take a second to review that a bit. So where did the conditioning come from? Really, if you think about it, in the early days of how we did business intelligence or data or analytics, we had kind of the first wave of tools. And the first wave of tools evolved and grew up around the idea that the database was pretty slow. It was for transaction processing. It wasn't for analytics. And if I wanted to ask a question of data, I took data out of those systems and I put it in a whole other big monolithic stack. These are the business objects and Cognos kinds of things of the past. And they had all the pieces in these platforms to manipulate the data and transform it and bring it through a pipeline and then put it in a report or put it into some cube or cache so that people could ask questions of it. But the problem was the data, infrastructure was pretty limited. So if I wanted to ask another question, I would have to start over. I'd have to go back to the beginning. I'd have to get stuff, bring it through this pipeline. And I'd actually have plumbers that were kind of fixing things and hooking them up and wiring stuff together. So it became a bit inflexible, right? And if I wanted to put, we were hearing this from early customers, if I wanted to put a new field on a report in some bank or something, that could take 3 months of change control to bring it through the system and change it. So what happened, I would say 7 or 10 years ago, really, is we blew those stacks up. We said those are not flexible enough, they're not helping people enough, we want to empower people and give them self-service tools, so we're going to blow those stacks up, right? And this is where last year I blew up the whale, but I'm not doing that this year. So what came out of that first wave when we dismantled the big monolithic stacks is really the second wave of BI and analytics tools. And I think that's where we largely are today. Like, these are real change. We're still in this phase. And what happened was we took all the pieces of a stack and we broke it into little bits. And we did tools for visualization, or tools for data preparation, or tools for governance, or tools for all these different things, right? And then we said, here, like, if you understand the data that I'm giving you, like, this will be self-service, right? It's kind of ironic, but if you understand it, like, you can use this self-service tool. But you know, if you want to do something across a broader organization, you know, you, Mr. Customer, have to wire this stuff together. And it became a bit of a mess. And I think we are in a bit of a mess. And these technologies still grew up around the idea that the database was slow. I mean, they were still evolving around the idea that we had to extract stuff, right? And that became a bit of a mess. And that's a problem. I mean, that really is a problem, right? Because I think it's just not about technology and BI and data and databases. It's about a business at the end of the day. And the nature of work in the business is changing. You know, I would argue that the future of work is data. Like, if you look at where competitive advantage comes from, if you look at how businesses are operating as they're moving to be much more fact-based, right? The way that we work is becoming data. And that is a fundamental shift. That's a cultural shift. That's a human shift. So we're grappling with the messes of the first and second wave. Meanwhile, the business is saying, I need more data. And they need more data because the workforce is changing. Right? Fundamentally, the workforce is changing. And I think people who are coming into the workforce now are conditioned to know that they should have information at web speed. Right? If I have a question, I should be able to get it answered really quickly. That's how everything else in the world works. Why doesn't that work in data? I would think in data that should be where we started, but no. I mean, I can find out, you know, who's the movie star in some old movie, but I can't find out what my revenue is last quarter or how it's grown. It's like these fundamental things that we still aren't answering from time to time that you think would be easier. Right? But this new hungry workforce now wants to work in data. They want to operate in data. They want to understand what's happening in the day, right? Not just what happened last month. They want to know what they should do next based in these facts. So the workforce is changing. So we have this mess, and then we have a workforce who's like, well, I should have data for everything. Why don't I have data? This seems crazy. So the user community is really saying, you know, I'm hungry. And as you look at it, you know, this data-hungry workforce is not just one or two people. I mean, these people have titles. In some cases, they're whole departments in an organization: revenue analytics, sales operations, marketing optimization. You know, there's all of these groups and people and departments now that operate on data, and that's really shifted. That's really shifted, and we've called this kind of the instrumented workforce. So now we have a workforce that, to do their job, is connecting into lots of different systems, into what's happening in Salesforce, what's happening in Marketo, what's happening in Zendesk, what's happening in all my internal systems. And they're bringing it together in the form of some kind of an application or dashboard or some interface so that they can understand how they're operating, what they should do right now, and really control the flow of their work process in data. And that's really, really a fundamental shift. And I thought, like, you know, we've introduced some of these concepts from time to time in different meetups, or we talked about some of this in last year's Join. But what would be great to do now is actually take a step back. And I wanted to talk to an organization, and I wanted you to hear from an organization who's seeing this transition of the workforce. So we're going to take a step back now, and Jen's going to come back on the stage with Dana from the Walt Disney Company, and we're going to hear about how in Disney they've seen these transitions in the workforce.